Thank you, sir. I will be speaking on common ocular surface disorders and ocular surface reconstruction. To understand about the ocular surface, it's probably one of the most complex and unique tissues in the body, the functions of which basically are to provide protection to the eye, to maintain the comfort of the eye, and to provide a refractive surface that allows for good quality vision. Herein, it's important to understand that the components of the ocular surface are many, and these are basically the lids, the tear film, the cornea, the conjunctiva, and the limbus, wherein reside the corneal stem cells, and each of these components together function as the ocular surface unit. Any disruption in this fine coordination between the various components of the ocular surface lead to ocular surface diseases. The spectrum of OSDs is varied. There are a wide range of conditions, and you could have, like Sir rightly said, diseases that cause minimal symptoms to those that ultimately lead to corneal blindness. Some of the common OSDs that we shall look at today are meibomian gland dysfunction, dry eye, pterygium and conjunctivochalasis, allergic diseases, and limbal stem cell deficiency. Looking at the lid disorders, they could be categorized into functional and structural, and we shall look at meibomian gland dysfunction first. The MGD workshop that was recently conducted classified MGD into two components, the low delivery state and the high delivery state, one in which there is a hyposecretion of meibum and the other in which there is a hypersecretion of meibum, and both of these ultimately lead to an alteration of the tear film, eye irritation, clinically apparent inflammation, and ultimately lead to ocular surface disease, including dry eye. There are various terminologies that have been redefined by the MGD workshop, and meibomian gland dysfunction itself falls as one of the categories of posterior blepharitis, the other causes for posterior inflammation being either an allergic or an infectious cause of inflammation. So what exactly is it that we are worried about as far as meibomian gland dysfunction is concerned? It could lead to disturbances in tear film. There could be a bacterial colonization along these openings. Inflammatory mediators are released, and there is definitely the component of host immune response. What are the manifestations? Patients could be absolutely asymptomatic. They could present to you with dryness-related symptoms. Here what you're seeing is a hypersecretory state, and when you press upon the upper lid, you can actually see cheesy meibum that is being secreted out of the glands, and you could have symptoms related to corneal involvement. This is a conjunctival flictin that occurs in MGD, and the treatment of this basically is topical steroids and management of the meibomian gland dysfunction itself. This is a recurrent corneal flictin, and these patients are extremely symptomatic. Again, the treatment is topical steroids after you've ruled out an underlying infective etiology and you manage the meibomian gland dysfunction. So this is a typical MGD where you have thickening of the lids, there is hyperemia of the lids, rounding of the posterior lid margin, telangiectasia of the lids, and you can see that there is some amount of surface inflammation and peripheral corneal vascularization due to the marginal keratitis that these patients have had. The treatment here obviously is again a short course of topical steroids and management of MGD, but the question is this treatment enough? So OSDs are one aspect of ophthalmology where you need to look beyond the eye, and this is a patient who actually is a patient of acne rosacea with severe meibomian gland dysfunction, and this needs to be treated in conjunction with a dermatologist who will take care of the acne rosacea component. A very severe but rare condition, the ectodermal dysplasia, which leads to there's a closure of the meibomian openings, and sometimes you need to take these patients up for repeated milking of the meibum from the meibomian gland openings, and you can see these cheesy noodle-like expression from the lid margins in these patients. So how do you manage them? The traditional management for MGD has been artificial lubricants, lid hygiene and warm compresses, topical antibiotics, topical steroids only when there is a need, as in the cases that you have surface inflammation or afflictin and systemic tetracyclines. You do have a lot of newer treatments in the form of topical azithromycin, topical cyclosporine, tear lipid supplements, sex hormones, and the omega-3 essential fatty acids, which have a role to play in the management of MGD. When we're talking about the lids, we also need to know about the Demodex mite. You can see the video here showing them actually moving when you examine under the simple microscope. It's basically a commensal parasite, Demodex folliculorum or brevis, and it's a cylindrical dandruff that these patients present with in the eyelids. Could be associated with MGD and acne rosacea, and how we normally diagnose it is you remove 4 lashes from each of the lid, and if you see more than 4 Demodex in under the cover slip, then you would probably consider it as significant, because this can sometimes lead to surface inflammation, as you can see here, and the treatment for this is local application of tea tree oil 50% by the ophthalmologist in the clinic, and it does definitely bring down the inflammation in the eye to a large extent. Among the structural lid disorders, it's important to differentiate dry eye from blepharospasm, because there is an increased frequency of the blink in both these category of patients, and you need to evaluate patients who are essentially diagnosed as blepharospasm for dry eye and treat them. This is a patient who has both blepharospasm as well as dry eye, and you need to manage both the conditions together. On the other hand, when you have a decreased frequency of blink or an incomplete blink, such as this patient, it's almost a 25-second video, it doesn't blink at all till you actually ask him to blink. This also causes problems because it can lead to epithelial defects, stromal scarring and infection. And when you're planning a procedure like a corneal transplant, all these factors have an important role to play in prognosticating the outcome in these cases. A neuroparalytic keratitis leading to lag of thalamus requires a tarsorrhaphy, again to address the exposure-related corneal epithelial problems that you could have in these situations. Moving on from the lid to the tear film, dry eye basically is a very common term that we use very loosely nowadays. The National Eye Institute definition of dry eye, initially if you see, it just had 2 components: dry eye due to tear deficiency or excessive evaporation, and this definition of dry eye has now been modified to say that it is basically a multifactorial disease. And if you look at the definition, it includes both the manifestations from the patient's aspect, the symptoms, the visual disturbance and the tear film instability, and it also includes the pathophysiology of dry eye, which is thought to be an increased osmolarity of the tear film and an inflammation of the ocular surface that leads to the condition. This is a very complex drawing, but what it tries to highlight upon are the various factors that are implicated in the etiopathogenesis of dry eye. But the core mechanism that has been identified or looked upon as the cause for dry eye is a tear film hyperosmolarity, which leads to epithelial cell or goblet cell death, which in turn leads to tear film instability, and the vicious cycle continues. You need to remember the etiopathogenic classification of dry eye. It's again broadly categorized into aqueous deficient and evaporative dry eye and the various causes for each. And when you're evaluating a patient of dry eye, you need to have this chart at the back of your mind so that you do not miss out any of the causes of dry eye. When you're approaching a patient with dry eye, these are the various parameters that we look at: the symptoms of the patient, history, clinical examination, the tests and the treatment. Symptoms are most commonly foreign body sensation, tearing, mucus discharge and a decrease in vision. History needs to be very thorough, not only to understand what the etiology is, but also to build a rapport with these patients, because these are chronic conditions and these patients are going to be coming back to you in your clinic, and you need to definitely build a rapport with these patients. You need to ask for a systemic history in these cases to rule out underlying systemic causes for dry eye. The clinical evaluation includes tests which are done to evaluate the quantity of the tears, which is the tear meniscus height, Schirmer's wetting, the tear film stability by means of the breakup time, the ocular surface damage by noting down the extent of ocular surface staining, and recent investigations like the Lippi view, which further tell us what the oil film in the tears. Basically, it can be graded and evaluated, and you also need to subject these patients to systemic investigations if you are suspecting an underlying immunological disease to be the cause for the dry eye. So this is both the fluorescein and the rose Bengal staining give you an extent of damage to the, give you an idea regarding the extent of damage to the cornea and the conjunctiva. Based on all these parameters, the DEW study came out with varying severity levels of dry eye from 1 to 4, and